A brutal sun hammered down on the Libyan desert, its glare turning the horizon into a wavering mirage. Colonel Heinrich Kruger lowered his dust-streaked goggles and steadied his binoculars, scanning the endless sands for any sign of movement. It was March 22, 1942, and the Afrika Korps teetered on the edge of exhaustion. His 3rd Panzer Regiment had so little fuel that each tank was allocated barely enough petrol to crawl 20 kilometers a day, their once rapid thrusts now reduced to cautious, halting advances. "Herr Oberst!" called Hauptmann Weber, his second-in-command, scrambling up the rocky outcrop where Kruger maintained his observation post. "Radio intercept from the British 8th Army. They're discussing a massive American supply convoy that arrived at Tobruk yesterday." Kruger's weathered face remained impassive, but his pulse quickened. American supplies meant one thing: abundance. While the German supply lines stretched impossibly thin across the Mediterranean, constantly harassed by British naval forces, the Americans seemed to possess limitless resources. According to intelligence reports referenced in Wehrmacht communications intercepted by German signals units, a single American fuel dump could contain more gasoline than his entire regiment received in 3 months. The colonel lowered his binoculars and studied the tactical map spread across a makeshift table constructed from ammunition crates. Red pins marked known British positions, while blue ones indicated German forces. Between them lay a vast expanse of seemingly empty desert, but Kruger knew better. Somewhere in that wasteland, Allied supply convoys moved like lifelines, carrying the fuel, ammunition, and provisions that kept Montgomery's forces operational. "What's our current fuel status?" Kruger asked, though he already knew the answer would be grim. Weber consulted his logbook with practiced efficiency. 14 Panzers operational, sir. Each has approximately 40 liters remaining. Enough for perhaps 30 kilometers of combat maneuvering. The supply trucks are in worse condition. 3 have been cannibalized for parts." Kruger nodded grimly. This was the reality of desert warfare in 1942. Rommel's Afrika Korps had achieved spectacular victories through audacity and tactical brilliance, but logistics remained their Achilles heel. Every drop of fuel had to be shipped across the Mediterranean, past British submarines and aircraft, then trucked hundreds of kilometers across the desert. Meanwhile, the Allies enjoyed increasingly secure supply lines as American industrial might reached full stride. A sudden commotion from the communications tent drew both officers' attention. Oberfeldwebel Möller, their senior radio operator, emerged with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Herr Oberst, priority intercept from Panzer Army Africa headquarters. British radio chatter indicates a major American supply depot has been established approximately 60 kilometers southeast of our position. Code designation Depot Charlie." The colonel's mind raced through tactical possibilities. 60 kilometers, well within striking distance, assuming they could maintain operational security and avoid British patrols. But it would require committing his remaining fuel reserves to a single desperate gamble. If the intelligence proved accurate, they might capture enough supplies to sustain operations for weeks. If not, his regiment would be stranded in the desert, easy prey for British armor. "Sir," Weber interjected cautiously, "such an operation would commit our entire mobile reserve. If we encounter significant resistance, then we die with our boots on, rather than starving in the sand," Kruger replied with characteristic bluntness. He had served under Rommel long enough to understand that audacity often succeeded where caution failed. The Desert Fox himself had built his reputation on precisely such calculated risks. Kruger began issuing rapid orders. Reconnaissance elements would probe toward the suspected depot location, while the main force prepared for immediate deployment. Fuel would be redistributed to maximize combat effectiveness, even if it meant abandoning some vehicles. Every man would carry extra ammunition and 3 days' rations. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the desert, Colonel Kruger stood beside his command Panzer, a battle-scarred Panzer IV that had carried him through countless engagements since arriving in North Africa. Tomorrow would bring either salvation or destruction. In the unforgiving mathematics of desert warfare, there was rarely anything in between. The gamble was about to begin. Colonel Kruger's intelligence network operated with the precision of a Swiss timepiece, despite operating in conditions that would challenge the most seasoned espionage professionals. His source was an unlikely asset, Sergeant Ahmed al-Mansouri, a local Bedouin who had initially served British forces as a guide before quietly switching allegiances when German gold proved more reliable than British promises. Al-Mansouri materialized at the German command post like a desert mirage, his traditional robes fluttering in the evening breeze. The Bedouin's knowledge of Allied movements had proven invaluable throughout the campaign, and his information had never been deliberately false, though it hadn't always been complete. The Americans, they are like children playing with fire, Al-Mansouri reported in his heavily accented German, learned during previous interactions with Afrika Korps personnel. They bring more supplies than 20 tribes could use in 5 years. Trucks, barrels, crates, everything stacked like mountains in the desert. Through his intelligence officer, Lieutenant Klaus Richter, Kruger learned the depot's approximate layout. According to Bedouin observations, Depot Charlie consisted of 3 main supply concentrations arranged in a triangular formation. The fuel dump occupied the northern apex, defended by what appeared to be a reinforced company of American infantry supported by several Stuart light tanks. The colonel studied aerial reconnaissance photographs obtained through Luftwaffe sources, though the images were frustratingly dated, taken nearly a week earlier during one of the rare instances when German aircraft could penetrate Allied air superiority. The photos showed extensive vehicle parks and supply stockpiles, but provided little detail about defensive preparations or guard rotations. The Americans rotate their patrols every 4 hours, Al-Mansouri continued, accepting a cup of ersatz coffee from Weber. They are methodical but predictable. Always the same routes, always the same timing, like merchants counting their gold at the same hour each day. Kruger recognized both opportunity and danger in this intelligence. American military doctrine emphasized systematic approaches and standardized procedures, qualities that made them formidable in prolonged campaigns, but potentially vulnerable to unconventional tactics. However, what the Americans lacked in tactical flexibility, they compensated for with overwhelming firepower and rapid reinforcement capabilities. Lieutenant Richter spread additional maps across the command table, marking suspected patrol routes and observation posts based on Bedouin intelligence. Sir, if we approach from the southwest during the early morning patrol change, we might achieve complete tactical surprise. The terrain provides natural concealment until approximately 800 meters from the perimeter. The colonel nodded approvingly. Richter possessed the methodical mind essential for desert warfare, where a single navigational error could prove fatal. The lieutenant had previously served with distinction during the siege of Tobruk, earning his promotion through competence rather than political connections, a rarity in an increasingly politicized Wehrmacht. As tactical discussions continued into the evening, Kruger's wireless operators intercepted additional Allied communications that painted an increasingly detailed picture of Depot Charlie's significance. According to decrypted British messages referenced in German intelligence summaries, the depot contained sufficient fuel to support an entire armored division for 2 weeks of intensive operations. For Kruger's fuel-starved regiment, such abundance represented salvation. However, intercepted American radio traffic suggested growing Allied awareness of German reconnaissance activities in the sector. Patrol frequencies had increased, and several references mentioned unusual Bedouin movement patterns that might indicate enemy intelligence gathering. Time was becoming a critical factor. We have perhaps 18 hours before Allied suspicions crystallize into concrete defensive measures, Richter assessed after reviewing the latest intelligence reports. After that, Depot Charlie will likely be reinforced beyond our capability to assault. Kruger made his decision with characteristic decisiveness. The attack would commence at dawn, during the vulnerable period when night patrols returned to base and day shifts assumed responsibility. His remaining fuel reserves would be concentrated in the fastest vehicles, maximizing their ability to exploit any breakthrough. As midnight approached, the colonel walked among his assembled troops, offering quiet words of encouragement to veterans who had followed him across half of North Africa. Tomorrow's gamble would determine whether the 3rd Panzer Regiment survived to fight another day or perished in a desperate attempt to solve their logistical crisis. The die was cast. Dawn approached with deceptive serenity across the Libyan wasteland as Kruger's strike force moved through the pre-dawn darkness like mechanized ghosts. The column consisted of 8 operational panzers, 12 half-track carriers, and 6 precious fuel trucks that would determine the mission's ultimate success or failure. Hauptmann Weber commanded the lead reconnaissance element, his 3 armored cars probing forward along the designated approach route. Behind them, the main assault force maintained radio silence while navigating by compass and dead reckoning. Electronic communications could be intercepted and triangulated by increasingly sophisticated Allied signals intelligence units. The desert presented both ally and enemy to the advancing Germans. Scattered rock formations provided concealment from aerial observation, while occasional wadis offered natural routes that avoided skyline exposure. However, the same terrain that concealed German movements also provided perfect hiding places for Allied ambushes or observation posts. Kruger rode in his command panzer, monitoring multiple radio frequencies while studying updated intelligence reports. During the night, his reconnaissance teams had confirmed al-Mansouri's information regarding patrol schedules and defensive positions. The Americans maintained professional security standards, but their predictable routines created exploitable vulnerabilities. "Contact front," Weber's voice crackled through the radio headset. "American patrol, 2 vehicles, approximately 1,200 meters northeast of our position. They appear to be conducting routine reconnaissance." The colonel raised his periscope and observed the distant dust clouds kicked up by American vehicles. Standard operating procedure would require engaging and eliminating any patrols that might compromise the mission, but gunfire would alert the entire depot garrison. Kruger faced the eternal dilemma of special operations, maintaining stealth versus eliminating threats. "Shadow them," he ordered. "Maintain visual contact but avoid engagement unless discovered." The German column adjusted course slightly, using terrain features to remain concealed while tracking the American patrol's movement. This delicate dance continued for nearly an hour as both forces moved through the broken landscape, neither fully aware of the other's proximity. At precisely 0530 hours, the Americans performed their scheduled route change, turning back toward Depot Charlie according to established patterns. Kruger's force continued advancing, now approaching the final terrain feature before the assault position, a low ridge that would provide both observation and cover for the attack's initial phases. Obergefreiter Hans Zimmermann, commanding the lead reconnaissance vehicle, reported visual contact with Depot Charlie's outer perimeter. Through high-powered optics, he observed extensive supply stockpiles arranged in orderly rows, protected by sandbag emplacements and wire obstacles. Several American soldiers moved casually between positions, their relaxed posture suggesting no immediate threat expectations. "Supply dump confirmed," Zimmerman radioed. "Estimated 40 fuel trucks, numerous ammunition trailers, vehicle maintenance facilities. Defensive positions appear lightly manned." Kruger absorbed this information while finalizing tactical assignments. The fuel dump occupied elevated ground approximately 800 meters from their current position, protected by natural terrain features on 3 sides. The Americans had positioned their defensive line to cover the most obvious approach routes, but they had apparently overlooked the possibility of attack from the southwest, exactly as al-Mansouri had predicted. The colonel checked his chronometer. 0600 hours exactly. According to intelligence reports, the American garrison performed shift changes at 0615, creating a brief window of reduced alertness as guards transferred responsibilities and briefed incoming personnel. "All units," Kruger transmitted over the tactical frequency. "Prepare for assault. Attack commences in 14 minutes. Remember? We need those fuel supplies intact. Avoid incendiary ammunition near the dump areas." As his forces deployed into attack formation, the colonel reflected on the mission's broader implications. Success would provide temporary relief from their logistical crisis, but it would also trigger massive Allied retaliation. Every German unit in North Africa would face increased pressure as Montgomery's forces sought revenge for this audacious raid. The morning sun climbed steadily above the eastern horizon, casting long shadows across the desert battlefield. In 13 minutes, those shadows would conceal the Afrika Korps' most desperate gamble since arriving in North Africa. Time crawled forward with mechanical precision toward the moment of decision. At precisely 0615 hours, Colonel Kruger's assault force erupted from concealment like a desert sandstorm given mechanical form. 8 panzers charged across the broken ground toward Depot Charlie, while Stuka dive bombers, summoned through carefully coordinated requests with Luftwaffe units, screamed overhead in their characteristic vertical attacks. The initial moments belonged entirely to the Germans. American sentries, caught during shift change exactly as intelligence had predicted, scrambled for defensive positions as high-explosive shells began detonating among their carefully arranged supply stockpiles. The distinctive crack of 20-millimeter cannon fire echoed across the desert as German armored cars engaged peripheral positions. Hauptmann Weber's lead element struck the depot's eastern perimeter with devastating precision. His panzer crews had trained extensively in close-quarters combat during their advance across North Africa, developing tactics specifically designed for overrunning fortified positions without destroying valuable supplies. High-explosive shells targeted defensive positions rather than supply areas, while machine gun fire suppressed American infantry attempting to establish organized resistance. Breakthrough achieved on eastern sector, Weber reported through static-filled radio communications. American resistance collapsing. Fuel dump is within reach. However, the Americans recovered from their initial surprise with impressive speed. Captain James Morrison, commanding the depot's security detachment, rallied his scattered troops and established a coherent defensive line anchored around 3 Stuart light tanks positioned near the fuel storage area. American training emphasized adaptability and initiative at all command levels, qualities that served them well during unexpected crises. The Stuart tanks opened fire with their 37mm guns, targeting German armor with methodical precision. While their weapons lacked penetrating power against modern panzers, they could disable tracks, sights, and other critical systems. More importantly, their presence forced Kruger's assault force to approach cautiously rather than charging directly toward the fuel dump. "Contact armored," reported Obergefreiter Zimmermann as his reconnaissance vehicle took fire from American positions. "Multiple targets, hull-down positions near the main supply concentration." Kruger assessed the tactical situation from his command position, while artillery shells, summoned by American radio calls for fire support, began falling among his advancing forces. The depot garrison had obviously prepared contingency plans for exactly this type of assault, suggesting higher quality leadership than German intelligence had anticipated. The battle's momentum shifted repeatedly during the next 20 minutes. German panzers advanced through concentrated American fire, losing 2 vehicles to combined arms tactics that utilized anti-tank guns, infantry bazookas, and coordinated tank fire. However, superior German armor and training gradually overwhelmed the outnumbered defenders. The decisive moment arrived when Lieutenant Richter's flanking force broke through the depot's northern perimeter, threatening to encircle the remaining American defenders. Captain Morrison, recognizing the impossibility of his tactical situation, began implementing demolition procedures designed to deny critical supplies to German forces. "They're preparing to destroy the fuel dump," Weber shouted over the radio as explosive charges detonated near several supply concentrations. Thick black smoke began rising from burning gasoline and oil, creating a pall that darkened the morning sky. Kruger faced an agonizing decision: continue the assault and risk losing the fuel supplies he desperately needed, or withdraw and preserve his remaining forces for future operations. The mathematics of desert warfare provided no comfortable alternatives. "All units, maximum assault," he ordered. "Overrun their positions before they complete demolition procedures." The final German charge resembled medieval cavalry attacks more than modern mechanized warfare. Panzers advanced at maximum speed directly toward American positions, accepting casualties in exchange for rapid closure. German infantry dismounted from half-track carriers and assaulted defensive positions with grenades and automatic weapons. The American defense collapsed within minutes under this concentrated pressure. Captain Morrison fell defending his command post, while his surviving troops retreated toward prepared evacuation positions. However, their demolition efforts had been only partially successful. Significant fuel stockpiles remained intact despite the smoke and flames that suggested total destruction. As German forces secured the depot perimeter, Kruger surveyed their prize with growing satisfaction. Despite combat damage and partial demolition, Depot Charlie contained enough fuel to sustain his regiment for several weeks of intensive operations. The gamble had succeeded, but at considerable cost. Colonel Kruger stood amid the still-burning wreckage of what had been Depot Charlie's defensive perimeter, surveying a scene that defied his most optimistic expectations. Despite the Americans' desperate demolition efforts, the fuel dump remained largely intact, a testament to both German speed and American inexperience with such contingencies. "Mein Gott," breathed Hauptmann Weber as he approached through the dissipating smoke, his uniform blackened by cordite and desert dust. "Sir, initial inventory suggests we've captured more fuel than our entire regiment has received since February." The numbers were staggering. Preliminary counts indicated approximately 60,000 liters of high-octane aviation fuel, 45,000 liters of vehicle gasoline, and substantial quantities of diesel fuel suitable for German equipment. Additional supplies included ammunition, spare parts, medical equipment, and food rations, luxuries that Afrika Korps personnel hadn't seen in months. Oberfeldwebel Müller coordinated salvage operations with characteristic Germanic efficiency, organizing work parties to transfer usable supplies before inevitable Allied counterattacks materialized. His experience as a logistics specialist proved invaluable as German troops sorted through American equipment, identifying items suitable for immediate use versus materials requiring modification or special handling. "The aviation fuel presents interesting possibilities," reported Lieutenant Richter as he supervised fuel transfer operations. "Our Luftwaffe contacts indicate this grade can be used in emergency situations by ground vehicles, though it requires careful mixture adjustments." Kruger nodded approvingly. Richter possessed the technical knowledge essential for maximizing their captured windfall. The lieutenant had previously served with Wehrmacht engineering units before transferring to combat arms, bringing valuable expertise in fuel chemistry and vehicle maintenance to the regiment's operations. However, the colonel remained acutely aware that time was their most critical enemy. Allied radio intercepts indicated massive reinforcements converging on their position. Montgomery's forces would arrive within hours, with overwhelming superiority in numbers and firepower. The captured supplies meant nothing if they couldn't be evacuated before British armor surrounded the depot. American prisoners provided additional intelligence regarding the depot's strategic significance. According to interrogation reports, Depot Charlie had been established to support a major Allied offensive scheduled for early April. The fuel and ammunition stockpiles represented weeks of careful accumulation, intended to sustain British armor during extended operations against Rommel's defensive positions. "Sir," Weber reported with barely concealed excitement, "we've discovered something extraordinary in the communications section. American radio equipment, including their latest encryption devices. Intelligence headquarters will consider this invaluable." The captured radio gear represented an intelligence goldmine that could provide insights into Allied operational planning for months to come. German signals specialists had struggled to penetrate American encryption systems, which utilized sophisticated techniques learned from British experience. These devices could potentially expose Allied strategies across the entire North African theater. As evacuation operations continued, Kruger received increasingly urgent reports regarding approaching British forces. Reconnaissance elements reported dust clouds approximately 30 kilometers northeast, multiple armored formations moving at high speed toward their position. The race against time was about to become literal. "All units, prepare for immediate withdrawal," the colonel ordered. "Maximum loads on all vehicles. Abandon anything that cannot be transported within 30 minutes. German efficiency reached peak performance during these critical moments. Fuel trucks were topped off, and additional supplies loaded onto every available vehicle, including captured American equipment pressed into German service. Wounded personnel received priority evacuation while demolition teams prepared charges to deny remaining supplies to approaching British forces. The irony was not lost on Kruger that his forces now faced the same dilemma that had confronted Captain Morrison: how to deny valuable supplies to enemy forces while conducting a fighting withdrawal. However, German preparation and discipline provided advantages that American improvisation had lacked. As the evacuation neared completion, the colonel took a final look around Depot Charlie's devastated perimeter. Burning vehicles and scattered equipment marked the scene of their morning's triumph, but the real victory was measured in fuel gauges and ammunition counters rather than territory occupied. The captured supplies would sustain German operations for weeks, potentially altering the tactical balance across the entire North African front. However, the long-term strategic implications remained uncertain as Allied industrial capacity continued expanding. Time to depart before those implications became academic. The German withdrawal from Depot. Charlie began with methodical precision, but quickly devolved into a desperate race across the unforgiving desert as British armor closed the distance with alarming speed. Colonel Kruger's fuel-laden convoy stretched across nearly 2 kilometers of broken terrain, vulnerable to air attack and ground interception at multiple points. Brigadier Sir Harold Wilson, commanding the British 22nd Armored Brigade, had received word of the German raid at 0730 hours through frantic radio calls from surviving American personnel. His response was swift and professional. 3 squadrons of Crusader tanks supported by motorized infantry and artillery, advancing at maximum speed toward the captured depot. "Contact enemy," reported Major Jeffrey Sterling, commanding the brigade's lead reconnaissance squadron. His armored cars had encountered German rearguard elements approximately 15 kilometers southeast of Depot Charlie, engaging in running firefights while reporting German movements to brigade headquarters. The pursuit developed into a classic desert chase, with British forces attempting to intercept the German column while Kruger's troops sought terrain that favored their defensive capabilities. The captured American fuel provided German vehicles with unprecedented range, but it also slowed their movement as heavily loaded trucks struggled across soft sand and rocky outcrops. Hauptmann Weber commanded the German rearguard, his 3 remaining panzers conducting a series of delaying actions designed to slow British pursuit without becoming decisively engaged. His tactics relied on the superior range and accuracy of German anti-tank guns, engaging British armor at maximum distance before withdrawing to successive defensive positions. British tanks, approximately 20 vehicles, advancing in extended formation, Weber reported through crackling radio communications. "Request artillery support on grid reference 473218. However, German artillery remained positioned too far west to provide effective fire support, forcing the rearguard to rely entirely on direct fire weapons and tactical mobility. This limitation became increasingly critical as British numbers grew through constant reinforcement from nearby formations. The chase continued throughout the morning as temperatures climbed toward their daily peak. Desert conditions favored neither side particularly, though British vehicles suffered more frequent mechanical failures due to their higher operational tempo. Crusader tanks, while faster than German panzers, possessed notorious reliability problems that became more severe under sustained operation. At 11:30 hours, the tactical situation shifted dramatically when British artillery finally achieved effective range on the German column. The first salvos fell among Kruger's supply trucks, destroying 2 fuel vehicles and creating spectacular explosions that could be seen for kilometers across the desert landscape. "We're taking casualties in the transport section," reported Oberfeldwebel Müller as his logistics team struggled to maintain convoy integrity under artillery fire. "3 trucks destroyed, multiple vehicles damaged. We need to increase distance or find better concealment." Kruger faced the eternal dilemma of convoy commanders: speed versus security. Increasing pace would reduce artillery effectiveness, but might result in mechanical breakdowns or vehicles becoming separated from the main body. Maintaining current speed allowed better formation control, but exposed the convoy to continued bombardment. The colonel chose audacity over caution, ordering maximum speed despite mechanical risks. The captured fuel supplies remained his primary concern. Losing trucks to breakdowns was preferable to losing them to British shells. His decision proved prescient as additional British formations appeared on both flanks, threatening to encircle the entire German force. "Sir," Lieutenant Richter reported from his position with the advance guard, "terrain ahead favors defensive operations. Natural ridgeline with good fields of fire, multiple withdrawal routes if necessary." The position Richter identified offered potential salvation: a series of rocky hills that could provide concealment from artillery while offering superior defensive capabilities against British armor. However, reaching those hills required crossing 8 kilometers of open ground under direct observation and fire from pursuing forces. As the German convoy approached this critical terrain, British pressure intensified from multiple directions. Artillery fire became more accurate as forward observers adjusted their targeting, while additional tank formations appeared on the eastern horizon. The race had become a trap, with Allied forces converging from 3 directions on Kruger's increasingly vulnerable column. The next hour would determine whether the Afrika Korps' greatest supply capture would prove salvation or destruction. Colonel Kruger's convoy reached the defensive ridgeline just as British artillery achieved devastating accuracy, transforming the final approach into a gauntlet of exploding shells and machine gun fire. 3 more fuel trucks were lost during the sprint across open ground, their burning wreckage marking the German retreat like funeral pyres in the desert sun. The ridge position, designated Hill 247 on German maps, provided the first tactical advantage Kruger had enjoyed since beginning his withdrawal. Natural rock formations created ready-made fighting positions, while multiple wadis offered concealment for vehicles and supplies. More importantly, the terrain channeled British approaches into predictable avenues that German anti-tank guns could cover effectively. "Defensive positions established," reported Hauptmann Weber as his panzer crews established interlocking fields of fire across the approaches to their position. All remaining vehicles under cover, fuel supplies secured in the reverse slope area. However, the German tactical situation remained precarious despite improved terrain. British forces now numbered approximately 60 armored vehicles, supported by artillery and growing air support, while Kruger's effective strength had dwindled to 5 operational panzers and perhaps 200 infantry. The mathematics of desert warfare strongly favored the pursuers. Brigadier Wilson coordinated his final assault with methodical professionalism, deploying his forces in a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm German positions through combined arms tactics. Artillery would suppress defensive positions while tanks advanced in bounds, supported by dismounted infantry equipped with the latest anti-tank weapons. "Right flanking force in position," reported Major Sterling through the brigade radio network. "Request artillery preparation on the eastern slopes, then we'll advance by squadrons." The British bombardment commenced at 13:15 hours with devastating intensity. High explosive shells exploded among the German positions, while smoke rounds concealed British tank movements. The barrage represented Allied material superiority at its most obvious. British forces could expend ammunition freely while German supplies remained strictly limited. Kruger's troops endured the bombardment with stoic professionalism, sheltering in their rocky positions while preparing for the inevitable assault. Afrika Korps veterans understood that survival depended on disciplined fire control and tactical patience rather than heroic gestures or premature engagement. "Contact front," called Obergefreiter Zimmermann as British armor emerged through the dissipating smokescreen. Multiple tanks, advancing in extended formation, approximately 1,200 meters. The German response demonstrated the tactical skill that had made the Afrika Korps legendary throughout the Mediterranean theater. Anti-tank guns engaged the leading British vehicles at maximum range, while remaining concealed until the last possible moment. Machine gun teams waited for infantry targets, while panzer crews selected priority targets among the advancing armor. The battle's first phase belonged to the Germans. Superior optics and gunnery training allowed Afrika Korps crews to engage British tanks before receiving effective return fire. 4 Crusaders were destroyed in the opening minutes, while 2 others withdrew with mechanical damage or injured crews. However, British numerical superiority gradually asserted itself as the assault developed. Fresh squadrons replaced damaged units, while artillery continued suppressing German positions with methodical precision. Major Sterling's flanking force advanced steadily up the eastern slope, threatening to envelope the German left flank. "Sir," Weber reported with characteristic calm despite the intensity of incoming fire, "Eastern positions under severe pressure. We may need to consider withdrawal to secondary positions." Kruger evaluated his tactical options with growing concern. The captured fuel supplies remained his primary objective, but defending them was becoming increasingly difficult as British pressure intensified from multiple directions. Evacuation remained possible through western routes, but would require abandoning significant portions of their precious cargo. The decision was made for him when British tanks achieved a breakthrough on the southern approach, advancing to within 300 meters of the supply concentration before being stopped by desperate German counterattacks. The fuel dump was now within range of British direct-fire weapons. "All units," Kruger transmitted over the tactical radio network, "prepare for final withdrawal. Load maximum fuel quantities on remaining vehicles. Abandon everything else." As afternoon shadows lengthened across Hill 247, the Afrika Korps prepared for their most challenging tactical maneuver, a fighting withdrawal while preserving their captured windfall. Time was running out. The German withdrawal from Hill 247 began under the cover of a massive dust storm that materialized across the battlefield like divine intervention. Colonel Kruger recognized the meteorological gift immediately. Such storms were rare, but provided perfect concealment for tactical movements when they occurred during combat operations. "All units, execute withdrawal plan Delta," Kruger transmitted, as his forces began their carefully orchestrated retreat. "Maintain radio silence except for emergency communications." The withdrawal plan reflected months of hard-learned experience in desert warfare. Rearguard elements would establish successive blocking positions, while the main convoy moved through predetermined routes toward German lines. Captured fuel would be distributed among the fastest vehicles to ensure maximum cargo preservation, regardless of casualties. Hauptmann Weber commanded the final rearguard action, his 2 remaining panzers engaging British armor at point-blank range as the main German force disappeared into the swirling dust. The fighting was intense, but brief. Weber's crews understood their mission was delay rather than decisive engagement. "Contact lost with enemy forces," reported Major Sterling as British visibility dropped to less than 50 meters. "Switching to movement by compass bearing. All units maintain formation and continue advance." The dust storm that provided German concealment also created significant challenges for their withdrawal. Navigation became extremely difficult as familiar landmarks disappeared in the brown haze, while vehicle separation posed constant risks. Several German trucks became lost during the first hour, requiring precious time and fuel to recover. However, Kruger's preparation proved decisive during these critical moments. His route planners had established waypoints using compass bearings and distance measurements, allowing the convoy to maintain general direction even without visual references. Radio beacons provided additional navigation assistance while minimizing electronic signatures that British forces might intercept. At approximately 15:30 hours, the German column encountered an unexpected challenge: a British blocking position established across their primary withdrawal route. A squadron of Grant tanks, apparently positioned before the dust storm began, waited in ambush along a narrow defile that offered no alternative passage. "Contact front," whispered Lieutenant Richter through his radio headset. "British armor, hull-down positions, approximately 400 meters. No apparent withdrawal route available." Kruger faced his most difficult tactical decision of the entire operation. Attacking the blocking position would require committing his remaining combat strength while risking the precious fuel supplies he had sacrificed so much to capture. However, remaining stationary would allow British forces to surround his position once the dust storm cleared. The colonel chose characteristic audacity. "All units, prepare for immediate assault. Maximum speed, concentrated formation. Punch through and continue withdrawal." The German attack emerged from the dust storm like mechanical thunder, catching British crews partially blinded by the same conditions that had concealed German movements. 3 panzers charged directly toward the British positions, while infantry dismounted to provide supporting fire from flanking positions. The engagement lasted exactly 11 minutes and cost both sides significant casualties. 2 German panzers were destroyed by British anti-tank fire, but the breakthrough was achieved when Richter's lead vehicle penetrated the defensive line and began engaging British positions from the rear. The Grant tanks, designed for frontal engagements, proved vulnerable to attacks from unexpected directions. "Breakthrough achieved," Richter reported as British resistance collapsed. "Route clear for convoy passage. Recommend maximum speed before enemy reorganizes." The remainder of the German withdrawal proceeded without major incident as the dust storm gradually subsided and visibility improved. British pursuit was disorganized and ineffective. Their forces had been scattered by the storm and required time to re-establish coordination and control. By 1800 hours, Kruger's battered convoy reached German defensive positions near Bir Hakeim, carrying approximately 30,000 liters of captured fuel, along with substantial quantities of ammunition and spare parts. The mission had cost him 2/3 of his armored strength and nearly half his personnel, but the strategic gains were immeasurable. As evening fell across the North African desert, Colonel Heinrich Kruger stood beside his remaining command vehicle and surveyed the day's achievements. The captured American supplies would sustain German operations for weeks, potentially altering the tactical balance across the entire front. However, the colonel understood that such victories were temporary in the larger strategic context. Allied industrial superiority was growing daily, while German supply lines remained vulnerable and inadequate. The Afrika Korps had won a remarkable tactical victory, but the war's ultimate outcome remained unchanged by a single supply raid, regardless of its spectacular success. This narrative draws from historical accounts documented in German military archives and Allied after-action reports, including materials referenced in The Desert War by Alan Moorhead and Wehrmacht tactical documents preserved in the Bundesarchiv.